Hey guys, Will here. So today we're going to be taking a look at the new Next Level Racing GT Lite Pro sim racing cockpit. Now this is a setup that is designed for those who might be looking to step up from a desk-based PC racing setup, or maybe those who might be looking for some sort of a racing setup that they can set up in front of their TV for console racing and then fold away and put out of sight when it's not being used. So this is rated for up to 13 Newton meters of peak force through the wheelbase. We're going to be putting it through its paces today with a variety of different sim racing hardware to see how it stacks up and whether this is something that is worth your consideration. So let's get started. Okay, so before we get started today, firstly, a big thank you to Micro Center for sponsoring today's video. Now, if you're in the US, you're probably already familiar with Micro Center as an absolute mecca when it comes to anything PC related, a lot of electronic gear, all kinds of things like that. But you might not know that they actually sell a massive and increasing range of sim racing hardware as well, including Next Level Racing. Now this is really exciting news for sim racers because it means you finally have the opportunity to get eyeballs on and hands on in some cases with a bunch of sim racing hardware before you pick it up. So they just opened up a brand new store in Indianapolis, which takes the total to 25 stores across the US, and they've got 2 more stores in Miami and Charlotte opening up by 2025. Now at the moment they've got a bunch of back to school specials going on with a ton of great tech from keyboards and mice all the way through to laptops and pre-built PCs. So check out the links down in the description below for all the details on that, or visit your local Micro Center store today. So back to the Next Level Racing GT Lite Pro now. So firstly, big thank you to Next Level Racing for sending across this cockpit for us to check out today. Now we will be comparing this across a couple of different scenarios in today's video. So if you're interested in any of the gear that we talk about in today's video, there'll be some links down in the description below. Those are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you. And that's just for those of you who find what we do here beneficial and want to help support our work. So we really appreciate that. And there will also be some discount codes there as well, depending on where you're located in the world. So make sure you check that out as well to make sure you're getting the best possible deal. And as is always the case, just make sure you're shopping around checking shipping costs because that can have a significant impact. So let's start off here by talking about pricing. So the Next Level Racing GT Lite Pro comes in at 499 Australian dollars, 299 US dollars, 279 pounds if you're in the UK, or 329 euros. So it's a little bit more expensive than the GT Lite Non-Pro that we reviewed about 3 years ago now, believe it or not. And while at face value, it does look very similar, it's a very similar basic concept here. There are a couple of upgrades which we'll take you through today, which do make it a little bit more sturdy than what we had with the GT Lite. So as I said in the intro, they're claiming that this cockpit can handle a direct drive wheelbase up to 13 Newton meters of peak torque. You can see we've got the CSL DD on here right now. That was the last one that we were testing with, but we did test this out with the Moza R12, running that all the way up to 12 Newton meters peak force. And we'll of course take you through the experience of using those various different configurations in today's video. But I think it's really important that you guys understand first and foremost that this is designed as something that you can fold and pack away into a closet or somewhere like that when it's not in use, rather than something that's going to be a permanent fixture in your living room or your study or something like that. So there are definitely some compromises here when it comes to the overall rigidity of the unit. But if you're looking for something that you can fold away after use, then this is definitely worth checking out. So let's go through everything now, take you through the basic design of the unit, and then we'll dive in and talk about the driving experience. So the cockpit comes partially pre-assembled. You will have to do a little bit of assembly work yourself. Took me probably maybe 20 minutes to put the whole thing together, not including obviously mounting the sim racing hardware. Probably an hour all up to get everything up and running. If it's your first time, is probably reasonable. Maybe 2 hours if you're not experienced with this kind of thing. But as is always the case with Next Level Racing these days, really good quality instruction manual. It takes you through all the necessary steps in picture form, and there is a really good assembly guide on their website as well, linked in the instruction manual. So I'm not going to take you through the entire step-by-step process here. It's just not really necessary. But suffice to say that we didn't run into any major issues with the assembly at all. All the holes lined up nicely. But yeah, pretty simple to put together. One thing I will mention, if you remember 3 years ago to our original GT Lite cockpit review, we actually got tripped up by the swivel mechanism on here that I'm going to show you in just a minute. We actually had to basically file out the little plastic piece here to get the metal to slide in and seat there. And because of that, I didn't actually realize that this entire assembly swivels, and it was probably one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in a review video, I would say. But nothing like that really this time to speak of. Everything went together very easily. We did just have to give the shifter mount a couple of hits with a rubber mallet just to get it to sit in place perfectly flush and get the screw through. But other than find that it was a very, very, very straightforward process with no complaints whatsoever. Just so you're aware, the box weighs in at 19 kilos, so it's not overly heavy either, something that you should be able to manage upstairs on your own pretty easily. So what have we got here in terms of features? Now, the first thing that stands out to me, and one of the things that I always look for in a sim racing cockpit, is adjustability. You obviously want to be able to make it fit your body shape, and I'm happy to say that this thing fits a range of people all the way from sort of early teenagers all the way through to somebody who's about 6 foot tall like me. No issues at all getting a comfortable seating position for me. And the way they've achieved that is actually pretty clever. So if I come around the front here quickly and show you these mechanisms down here, this is like I guess you could call it a cam mechanism for want of a better term. So what you can do is you can release this lever, and you can see that actually releases the tension on each of these individual segments, and these lock into position in each area. So all you need to do is just wind this out a couple of turns to loosen it, and then you can actually move the various different elements into the position that you want and then lock it all into position when you're done. So for example, if you wanted to have the shifter over here on the left-hand side for Australian roads, for example, you just flick that up into the position that you want and then lock it into position like so. And likewise, if you need to make adjustments here to the bottom base bar or the seat position, or even just the upright here for the wheel deck, then you can move all of those pieces independently. Now, they go through probably, I'd say, a 15 to 20 degree step in each rotation. So it doesn't give you really granular fine control over the adjustments. But once you kind of work in all the angles in the various different areas that we'll take you through now, yeah, it does give you quite a bit of adjustability there that I think is going to suit the majority of people. So we've got some adjustment here on the side as well, which raises and lowers the front of the seat. Now they're suggesting that if you're really tall, you put it in the maximum position. I actually found that somewhere in the middle was best for me. But again, it's going to depend on the pedals that you're running, what kind of pedal plate they have too. So just going to have to do a little bit of trial and error there to make sure that everything gets sorted out. And then the backrest also has an adjustment mechanism here too. So you can see there's a little spring-loaded pin on either side. I'll grab the other one too. And what that allows you to do is move it in a forward position, a middle position, and a fully reclined position. So 3 different positions there. And again, there's enough adjustability there to suit the vast majority of people. I didn't have any issues at all getting myself in a comfortable seating position. So then moving up to the wheel deck, you can see a plastic clamp mechanism down here, which basically just unscrews and allows us to tilt the wheelbase through a decent range of movement there. Now, one thing that we did notice on this particular sample is that there's a bit of a defect in the weld just there, which makes it a little bit less adjustable than it should be. It should actually be able to go a little bit more upright than what we had on this particular sample. So a little bit of a quality control thing there. I did mention that to them, and of course they said that we're the first person that's had that problem. Everybody always says that about every problem. So yeah, let us know in the comments whether you have the same issue, but you should actually have a little bit more adjustment there than what we have on this particular sample. Now we're going to come back to the wheel deck in just a minute and talk about mounting. I'd say this area of the cockpit is probably the weakness and the thing that I think could do with the most improvement. But let's move on now to pedals and we'll come back to mounting up there. So we've got a sliding mechanism here that allows us to easily loosen these bolts, and you can actually use the ratchet here as well. So when you're tightening, you can kind of ratchet it in either direction. So you can loosen those off, and that allows you to slide the entire pedal deck forward and back. You've got nice big slots here as well, which allow you to mount pretty much any pedals that you can imagine through from the bottom or in from the top with bolts on the bottom. The CSL Elite V2 pedals are a little bit tricky to mount in the best of cases. You kind of have to go in through these holes here. Thankfully, they do have holes on the top now, which makes it a little bit easier. And as you can see here, plenty wide enough to mount a 3-pedal set like the Fanatic CSL Elite V2 pedals, which we have mounted up here, which I would definitely recommend. Check out the review that we did of these pedals. These are my pick for the best value sim racing pedals on the market and have been for pretty much almost a year now, I think, since they came out. So definitely check out our review of these pedals if you're looking for a good high quality set of pedals at a very reasonable price, at least in my opinion. Now, the last adjustment that we have down here as well is the ability to actually flip this piece here upside down. That allows us to adjust between the 15-degree tilt that you see on the pedal plate now and a flat position. Now, I actually prefer the flat position for the majority of pedals. Most pedals within this kind of price range that people are going to be looking at for a cockpit like this do already have a bit of a slant on them. So it's just going to depend on what you're wanting to run, but just make sure that when you're sitting in the rig, you're pushing the brake pedal from your thigh and not kind of just relying on your ankle solely. I see a few people set up cockpits like this incorrectly, and it can have a very big impact on the overall driving experience. So yeah, for me, I sit this flat, but you do have the ability to tilt it up to 15 degrees should you wish to do so. So working our way back towards the rear of the cockpit Now you can see these new straps, which are an addition over what we saw on the GT Lite non-Pro version a couple of years back. So what this does is it creates a rigidity across the entire length of the cockpit. So what happens here is when you've got your feet down on the pedal base here, it secures this part in position, because you can see that actually tilts up and down very easily otherwise. So that creates a foundation there, and those straps then give you rigidity in the wheel deck. So it's kind of pulling the wheel deck forward and holding it in position so it doesn't just flap around everywhere. And if we continue to move back here, you can see we've got another strap here which secures through to the rear of the deck, and that's pulling in the opposite direction just to give you that extra rigidity in the wheel deck itself. So what you would do is you'd sit down in the cockpit and then ratchet those down as tight as you can in either direction, and that's going to give you the maximum amount of available strength and rigidity in the cockpit. So if we come around the back now, you'll also notice they've added some little caster wheels over what we saw on the GT Lite previously. So once you're all folded up, that allows a nice easy way to wheel the cockpit away into wherever you want to store it. And then moving up here to the seat back, this is another area where they've changed quite a bit over the GT Lite that we looked at previously. So you can see this has got a lot more shape to it overall. The GT Lite was pretty much just like I guess you could call it a camping chair, was probably the most accurate description. It did have a little bit of padding around the sides, but it didn't really give you the sense that you were in a bucket seat, and it didn't give you that sort of, I guess, snugness to the fit. One thing I did notice about that cockpit in particular is when I was driving a more powerful wheelbase, it did tend to sort of have me sliding around quite a bit. It felt a little bit insecure. This definitely is an improvement over that. And then in terms of the materials, we've got a nice, some kind of suede or Alcantara type material around the perimeter here, which feels quite nice and smooth to the touch. It doesn't mark and sort of, fluff up too badly. I mean, I haven't used this for an extended period of time yet, but definitely no signs of early wear and tear or anything that I'm particularly concerned about in the design. Again, considering the price point here, it is quite expensive for our entry-level cockpit, so you would expect to see high-quality materials being used. Lots of support here in terms of padding, lots of ventilation too, so you can see this kind of mesh material that they're using throughout, which does keep you quite cool. I drove for probably up to about an hour and a half in a single stint in this cockpit, and yeah, no issues at all in terms of back support or comfort for me personally. Obviously, everybody's going to vary there, but yeah, ventilation was absolutely fine, and I definitely think that this seat design is a big improvement over what we had with the GT Lite. So I think when you factor in the various different elements and the differences here between the GT Lite and the GT Lite Pro, it is significantly more expensive. I don't think that the straps give you a significant enough improvement in the rigidity to justify the increase in the price, but I do think that the more support that you have in this seat is, it's a very subjective thing, but for me, I definitely found this seat to be a big improvement over the GT Lite, which was definitely something that I was hoping for given the difference in the price. So we already covered mounting of the pedals. Let's talk about shifter, handbrake, and wheelbase now. So starting with the shifter, I might actually just spin this around quickly so Tom can see it a little bit better with the camera. So by default, inside the box, it comes with this pre-installed bracket that just basically bolts through into this and allows you a nice clean surface to mount whatever handbrake and shifter you wish to. So Fanatec and Thrustmaster will all bolt directly onto this. Obviously, they can't account for every single manufacturer out there, but check their website for the list of compatibility options there. In the case of the Fanatec shifter, it does just bolt directly onto the base plate like so, and then you can mount the handbrake onto the side of the shifter if you wish to do so using the little T-nuts that they include with the shifter. So that is absolutely no problem whatsoever. Where we did run into a couple of snags though was with the mounting of the wheelbase. So what I want to do now is travel back in time and I'll show you exactly the issue that we came across. So this is the issue that we're dealing with here. This is the mounting plate for this particular rig, and this mounts to the top of the rig with 4 countersunk screws like this. So these basically go through, they sit flush so that the wheelbase can sit on top of that. So you can mount that either in the center position as it comes by default, in the further forward position like so, or a further back position like so. Now we figure that the most common wheelbases that people are going to be using with this particular rig, at least at the time that we're filming this, are going to be a CSL DD GT DD Pro from Fanatec, or say a Moza R5, R9 or R12. So we figured we'd test all those configurations. So if you come down to the floor now, let me just show you exactly what's going on. So keep in mind again that you have to mount this plate to the rig either using any 4 of these holes. So those 4, these 4, or these 4. So when you flip this over and you actually want to mount it to your R9, for example, or this is actually an R12 here, but R5, R9, and R12 all have the same mounting holes. You can see these are the 4 mounting holes that line up, but when you've got it up on here, in the center position, those holes are inaccessible. So you might think, well, why don't you just take this off and bolt it to your wheelbase and then put it back on here? But you can see the base itself is actually wide enough that it blocks access to these holes. So you do actually have to put the base on after. Now, similar with the CSL DD here as well, and the GT DD Pro, this can use a 4-hole configuration or 3, as we've got it configured here. So you've got the one at the front, but you can see again here, we've got the same problem with those holes not being accessible from the top side, and these holes not being accessible from the bottom side when you want to mount them back on again. So we run into a bit of a snag here. So you can mount this like that, and that does give you access to the 4 holes, but then you have a ton of leverage here. It actually makes a noticeable difference to the amount of flex that you have. So the best solution that we can find is to only actually use 2 mounting screws to mount the Mozza and Fanatic wheelbases to. So what we would do in that configuration is just bolt it using these 2 and leave the back ones free, and then with the CSL DD or GT DD Pro, simply just have the 2 T-nuts at the front like so. And that seems to be the best compromise, but I just wanted to let you guys know that there is that compromise there. You are gonna have to, either use 2 mounting holes or come up with some other way of mounting it. So after we recorded that, we did spend about a day and a half just experimenting and making sure that that was the best solution. And yeah, what we came up with was basically exactly what I described in the video. So we did end up leaving this mounted in the middle. We'll run some footage now. You can actually see for yourselves what it looked like mounted in the furthest forward position, which allowed accessibility for those 2 extra holes. There was just a lot more perceivable flex in the deck. It just gives you a lot more leverage, and yeah, just makes the experience nowhere near as good as it was mounted through the center like this. So yeah, long story short, basically using just the 2 mounting holes at the front for the Mozza R5, R9, and R12 didn't introduce any additional flex that we could perceive on camera or that I felt when I was driving. And likewise with the CSL DD, we just used the 3 holes across the front here, secured it down nice and snugly. And yeah, given the amount of flex that you have here already inherent in the wheel deck, yeah, it wasn't anything that added any additional flex on top of that. So it seemed to be absolutely fine. I drove with it for about a day and a half on and off with various different wheelbases. Didn't have any issues with anything coming loose or anything like that. But I do think that there's definitely some improvement that could be had in the overall design of this wheel deck. It's definitely the biggest weakness of this cockpit overall. So let me unfold this now and I'll show you how you actually get in and out. I'll just move this guy out of the way as well. So there's a little mechanism on the side here. It's a little plastic latch, and it's actually got a little metal piece in the middle there, so it's not entirely plastic, but basically you just release the clip, unfold the latch there, and then that allows you to fold the entire thing across like so. If I was smart, I would have done my cable management on the other side. They do actually include some little straps here for cable management as well, just to keep things nice and tidy. So you step in, you sit down like so, you make sure that your strap isn't tangled with your pedals, and then you sit it back in position, fold this guy around, clip it in like so, and you are ready to get in and start doing some driving. So it's as simple as that, nice and easy to climb in and out of. As I said before, I did prefer to have the pedals set flat for my particular body shape, but ergonomically, I do think that there is plenty of adjustment available here. So now that we're seated in the cockpit, let's take you through the actual experience of driving with this thing. So we tested it across a wide variety of different styles of driving, from drifting, GT3, F1, all the way through to rally style driving. We also tested with the CSL DD at a variety of different peak strengths, so from 5 Newton meters right through to the 8 Newton meters that you get with the boost pack, as we can see installed right now. We also tested with the Mozza R5, R9, and R12 wheelbases. The majority of the footage you'll see here will be with the CSL DD and the Mozza R12. The thing I want to, I guess, make very clear here is that you're going to see quite a lot of flex and movement in the cockpit. And look, I'm certainly not trying to make excuses for the product here at all. The flex is real, it is what it is, and you guys can see it for yourself, so I'm certainly not trying to mask that. What I do want to explain to you, I guess, to give you a further context to what you're seeing on camera here, is that the flex as you actually perceive it as a driver isn't anywhere near as extreme in the wheel deck specifically as what you see elsewhere. I did find that the shifter definitely does feel like it's moving around quite a bit in your hand compared to what I'm used to being a multi-$1,000 aluminium profile rig. But for somebody who's just doing casual driving and needs that flexibility of being able to fold something away and pack it away when they're not driving with it, I think that that's definitely within an acceptable range. Definitely not something that I think is worth complaining about. Likewise with the pedals as well. We ran this with the CSL Elite V2 pedals, as I showed you earlier. I have these on the absolute stiffest setting available. That is pretty much as stiff as a set of Acertec Forte pedals, for example, the way I have it set up. And regardless of whether you have it in the flat 0-degree layout or the 15-degree tilted layout as I have it right now, yeah, definitely nothing that I would say is excessive in terms of flex whatsoever, even with a more solid set of pedals like what we have here. Absolutely, if you're driving with Logitech pedals or Thrustmaster pedals, something like that, you're certainly not going to have any issues whatsoever. Even Moza pedals are absolutely fine, all the way up to something like your Husingvelt Sprints, for example. It's probably only if you're going to be getting into the really high-end stuff that you might start to want to look at something a little bit more solid, but at that kind of price point, you're more than likely going to be looking at a more high-end Cockpit that doesn't have these compromises in the first place anyway. So I'd say the pedal arrangement here is absolutely adequate, and in my opinion, more than enough for the likely scenarios that you're going to be using a Cockpit like this. So no complaints whatsoever with regards to the pedal. Now, the other thing that I always test as well is the overall rigidity in terms of back support too. So when I'm pushing on the brake, as I mentioned earlier, you're always wanting to kind of push with your thigh. And you will notice there is a little bit of flex there. If I push really hard, it does tend to sort of want to sort of fold the cockpit out a little bit. That is pushing extremely hard though. Under normal kind of braking scenarios, not too much of a problem whatsoever. There is plenty of back support there as well. So as I'm pushing on the brake, obviously my butt is pushing into the back of the seat, and I feel plenty supported there as well. In fact, I'd say the seat is actually really comfortable. So yeah, nothing to complain about at all with regards to the overall sensation of rigidity from your foot through to your bottom. Where I do feel like this thing is lacking though, is in the support that you get for the wheel deck itself. And you can see for yourselves right now, just as I'm sitting here, there is a lot of flex there. Now, some of that is coming from this upright assembly. That is mitigated to some extent by these straps here, but the majority of the flex is actually coming from the plastic assembly here that they've used to mount the wheel plate to the actual deck here. So you can see, if you look carefully, probably about 50% of that twist is actually in the interface down here. Now, the other thing that you might notice here as well is that because of these straps, when I do actually flex that wheel deck, it does actually lift the pedals up as well when I'm just sitting here. When you're actually sitting in the rig, you've got your heels planted on the heel plate and you're pushing down on the throttle or on the brake. That kind of keeps things a little bit more solid in position. So you don't perceive that movement when you're actually driving, but the movement in the wheel deck you definitely do perceive. Now, I'll admit that what you're seeing on camera looks way more extreme under all the driving scenarios that you're seeing here than what I actually perceive as the driver. I don't feel the sensation of the wheel kind of moving around in my hands like what you see on the camera. I'm paying attention to the screen in front of me, obviously. I'm not looking at the wheel deck. At the moment that I break my concentration and actually look at the wheel, I notice the amount of movement there, and then I perceive it more, if that makes sense. But when I'm in the zone, I'm actually just looking at the screen in front of me. I don't perceive all this movement in the wheel deck. But what the flex in the wheel deck does do is give a significant damping effect to the force feedback. So what I mean by that is it's taking the edge off the effects. It's damping everything down to the extent that I think, yeah, I've spent 3 or 4 days now driving and testing under different scenarios, and the best way that I can think of to describe this is it makes a direct drive wheelbase feel like a belt-driven wheelbase. So when I go back to something like the Fanatec Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5, overall it feels extremely smooth, but it just doesn't quite have that granular detail that you get out of a direct drive wheelbase. And that's what all the direct drive wheelbases that we tested with this Cockpit feel like. Now, it doesn't have a massive impact in terms of overall speed and consistency, but going from a more solid mount back to something like this, it was definitely absolutely unequivocally noticeable. I think the key takeaway here is that this Cockpit is about compromise. I think that if you're the sort of person that really needs something that you can fold away and pack away when you're not using it, if that's the difference between racing and not racing for you, then yeah, this is absolutely worthwhile. I think in terms of giving you a nice easy way to fix a set of pedals to a seat, not have them pushing away from you like they would at a desk setup, for example, an office chair where you might be rolling backwards, for example, all those things are absolutely improved with a Cockpit like this. But what I would say is that if you've already got those issues sorted with a desk setup and you have a nice solid way of mounting your direct drive wheelbase to your table, then the experience with this may actually be a little bit worse than what you would get on a table. You can see for yourselves in the footage just how much this thing's moving around. I've described already the damping effect that that has on direct drive force feedback. So if that's a sacrifice that you're willing to make for the portability here, the flexibility, and the fact that you're actually getting a cockpit that you can set up and adjust things on to suit your particular driving style, then yeah, it might be worth it for you. But I definitely wouldn't say that everybody that's running on a PC desk setup should be rushing out and buying something like this. I think it's definitely something that you need to consider quite closely. And remembering again as well that there are other options on the market at around this similar kind of price point that don't have the ability to fold up and pack away like this does, but do give you a lot more rigidity and give you a much better overall driving experience. So it's really just going to come down to your own circumstances there and what you place value in for your particular scenario. But the more I think about this, the more I think that the ideal customer for something like this is probably going to be those who are racing on a console and need something that they can fold away behind the couch, set out of sight of the missus when they're not driving, and just quickly bring out and fold out when they want to do some driving when the opportunity arises. I think that's really where the value is in something like this. And it's just going to come down to, beyond that, just weighing up the pros and cons. Another thing that we're going to be looking at soon on the channel here as well is the Coffee Racer sim rigs. I haven't had the opportunity to drive with those yet, but we'll be checking them out very soon here on the channel. That is a really interesting design because it's actually a coffee table that folds away into a sim rig. So it kind of gives you a similar ability to hide your rig away when it's not in use, but it does look like it's going to be quite a lot more rigid than something like this is. So definitely stay tuned. Make sure you're subbed so you don't miss out on that video in the future. But look, I think if you're the person that this is designed for, then it does do an overall pretty good job. I think that in terms of the rigidity of the pedals, absolutely no complaints whatsoever. I think they're definitely strong enough. The shifter as well, I think, is okay, even though there is a little bit of perceivable movement there. Backrest and everything, absolutely fine. No issues with flex there whatsoever, at least for me. But I really do think that the wheel deck could have been better than this. I think this is definitely the weakness. Looking at it, I don't know what they could do different to reinforce it. I feel like the plastic mechanism that they've used under here is where the majority of that flex is coming from. Maybe if they could add some sort of additional support across the top here, maybe you can fabricate yourself something that would reinforce this and make it a little bit stronger once you got it in a position that it's gonna stay. But yeah, look, regardless of the driving that I was doing, whether it was GT3, F1, drifting, rally, whatever I threw at it, I couldn't get away from that sensation of, yeah, just damping in the force feedback and just taking the edge off those effects that you're spending your money on if you're buying a direct drive wheelbase. That's really the advantage that direct drive brings to the table. And unfortunately, you are sacrificing that, at least to some extent, by running a direct drive wheelbase on this cockpit. So yeah, look, it does stand up to 12 Newton meters, 13 Newton meters of peak force. It certainly wasn't falling apart on me or anything like that. But yeah, this one unfortunately isn't necessarily a big thumbs up from me. I think if you happen to fit within that very specific target audience for the product, then you're probably going to be satisfied with it. But I wouldn't be being honest with you guys if I didn't say that I wasn't disappointed, I guess is probably the best word, with the amount of flex that we have here in the wheel deck. I just think for the money, they could have done a better job there. Otherwise, I'm very, very happy with what we have here. So I think that pretty much does it for today's video, guys. Thank you very much for watching once again. If you want to check out any of the other reviews we've done for other cockpits and direct drive wheelbases, shifters, wheels, pedals, you name it, we've reviewed it here at Boosted Media. So check out the links down below for all of that extra information. Check out the discount codes as well if you are looking to pick one of these up. And of course, make sure you check out the sponsor of today's video, Micro Center, via the links down in the description below. And thank you once again to them for sponsoring today's video. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye.